Speaker. Morning, everyone. Mr. Speaker, I rise to move that the Local Content Bill 2021, Bill number 21 of 2021, published on the 15th of December 2021, be now read a second time. Mr. Speaker, today is indeed a landmark day for the people of Guyana, for the country as a whole, a day when together as government and opposition, that we will pass the Local Content Bill, a bill that speaks to benefits for Guyanese from the oil and gas sector. And Mr. Speaker, there have been many questions around the country, rightly so by Guyanese, as to how they can benefit directly from the oil and gas sector. And today, the Local Content Bill will answer those questions. It is our hope, Mr. Speaker, that the opposition will see it necessary to support the Local Content Bill, since it is a bill that speaks directly, towards the transformation and upliftment of people's life, since it speaks towards benefits being derived for Guyanese from the oil and gas sector. Mr. Speaker, there may be comments that the bill might be a bit too late, that there were no consultation. But Mr. Speaker, the very opposition that is echoing those sentiments were in government from 2015 to 2020. And one would recall that oil was discovered in Guyana in 2015. Our forest lift, our production started in December 2019, when the APNU AFC was in government. Mr. Speaker, unfortunately, and it is a known fact, that there is no framework to manage the oil and gas sector. There was none when we took office in August 2020. There was no proper local content policy in place when we took office in 2020. Worse yet, Mr. Speaker, there was nothing of a draft bill on local content when we took office in 2020. So what was done by the APNU AFC in the 5 years when we discovered oil and when we started production? Nothing, Mr. Speaker. Nothing to manage the sector, nothing to derive benefits for Guyanese. So to say that it is too late during 2015 to 2020, and as we say in Guyana, while the grass was growing, the horse was starving. We are seeking to address that today with the passage of the Local Content Bill in this General Assembly. The opposition, as we know it, Mr. Speaker, they were busy from 2018 to 2020 August, busy trying to rig elections and to stay in power illegally, rather than to craft policies and table bills that would bring benefits from the oil and gas sector to our Guyanese brothers and sisters. Mr. Speaker, before I go further, I wish to thank His Excellency President Mohamed Irfan Ali for his insight and guidance, because as you would recall, when he took office in August 2020, he immediately set up a high-level panel to start the consultations, Honorable Maipal, to start the consultations in September of 2020. The high-level panel, chaired by Mr. Sham Nakhtar, included a number of persons, a number of prominent Guyanese, including Mr. Carl Greenwich, Mr. Floyd Haynes, Mr. Carville Duncan, and a few others who carried out consultations throughout the entire country. And we did not stop there, Mr. Speaker. One would recall that the first draft of the bill was presented in this very building, this dome that we are in today, by none other than His Excellency the President of the country, where we held again a widespread consultation with every single stakeholder throughout the country, including private sector, the operators, and civil society. Mr. Speaker, and we did not stop there, we continued. We continued with consultations with the team at the Ministry of Natural Resources. We also received a number of submissions from groups around the country. Unfortunately, only yesterday we received a submission from the opposition, even though they were invited to do so a while back, especially with Mr. Carl Greenwich being a part of that high-level team or panel that was established by His Excellency in September of 2020. So to say that the bill, there was no consultation, Mr. Speaker, it is not justified. It is wrong, totally wrong to say that there was no consultation. Only recently, a few weeks ago, we had another consultation at the Pegasus, led this time by the Vice President, Dr. Bharrat Jagdeo, that involves the private sector again and the operators. So we have spent over a year, Mr. Speaker, consulting with the various groups across the countries, especially the private sector, the operators, civil society. So the local content bill that is presented to the National Assembly, Mr. Speaker, is a bill that represents the views of all those who were consulted. It is a working document. It is a living document. No local content bill can remain static in any country in the world. Nothing in the local content bill is cast in stone, because as we continue to assess our capabilities and our capacity, of course, we will have to change targets and make changes to the schedule in the local content bill, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker Ford, I wish also to thank the Vice President for his guidance and his stewardship in crafting this bill to finality. Also, I wish to thank the teams from the Ministry of Natural Resources and the Ministry of Legal Affairs, the Attorney General and his team from Legal Affairs, who would have worked tirelessly to ensure that we have a bill, a working bill, presented to the National Assembly in 2021 and pass with the support of all also in 2021. Mr. Speaker, many may ask, why is it that the local content bill is so important? Why is it that we need to ensure that we put in place a local content bill and not only a policy? Because we cannot Thank you. Mr. Speaker, at least now we have a board for the Guyana Power and Light Company. I know for 2018, 2019, and I think 2020, there was no board. So we have a board where there is transparency and accountability, and not one man running the company. Mr. Speaker, that is why our government has started the gas to energy project, which will address this age-old problem, and that we can use that as a catalyst to truly realize local content in Guyana. Mr. Speaker, we decided that we are not going to stop at the policy, but we are going to move towards having a legislation in place to ensure that the IOCs, the contractors, and the subcontractors ensure that businesses trickle down to Guyanese and Guyanese businesses, and to ensure that Guyanese are directly employed in the oil and gas sector in key positions and not only as laborers and security. Mr. Speaker, the local content legislation will ensure that the oil company are compelled, that the contractors and the subcontractors are compelled to employ Guyanese, that they're compelled to ensure that they do business with Guyanese businesses. Mr. Speaker, Mr. Speaker, we even went further. We even went further to ensure that we put a definition of what a local company really is, because we didn't want to leave it vague. We didn't want to leave it vague and at the discretion of people, but to ensure that there is a definition in the legislation or in the bill to describe exactly or to say exactly what a local company is. And it is clear in the bill, and I believe, Mr. Speaker, the bill is so clear and so simple that every single Guyanese can understand what is in it. Every single Guyanese will know that there is nothing hidden in this bill. It is as clear as day, and it is simple to understand. There is no hidden agenda. There is no hidden agenda by our government. Everything is plain and simple. And I'm sure that members of the opposition would have read the bill. Well, I hope that they did. I hope that they did read the bill and they understand the bill properly too. That they understand the bill and that they will support it. Mr. Speaker, we said in the bill that a Guyanese business must have at least 51% ownership. That a Guyanese must have at least 51% voting rights. And we did not stop there. We did not stop there because we realized that people can be used as economic rent, or people can front for international companies, like it is happening in some countries around the world. So we did not stop there to say a Guyanese must have 51% of the shares. We went further to say that 75% of the managerial staff in the company must be Guyanese. 75% of the managerial staff must be Guyanese. And we went even further, Mr. Speaker, to say that 90% of the staff, 90% of the other staff must be Guyanese as well. So that is in the local content bill. 51% of the company must be owned by a Guyanese or Guyanese national. 75% of the managers and senior staff must be Guyanese. 90% of the other staff employed in the organization must be Guyanese. That is the length to which we went, Mr. Speaker, to ensure that our Guyanese brothers and sisters are beneficiaries of the oil and gas sector. Mr. Speaker, the companies, our local companies, of course, will be allowed to register. We will create what we call the Local Content Secretariat at the Ministry of Natural Resources. That is the body that will monitor local content, that will do enforcement, and that is the company that will do, that is the agency that will do the assessment also. So the bill speaks to the creation of a Local Content Secretariat, which will be headed by a director. So, Mr. Speaker, upon the passage of this bill in the National Assembly today, with the support of all, and the assent of the President, it means that we will start to create this unit which we call the Local Content Secretariat, headed by a director. The first task of the Local Content Secretariat, Mr. Speaker, will be to start creating the registers. 2 registers, as a matter of fact. One register that will speak to human resources, employment, seeking employment for people, where people or young Guyanese who are trained and who would like to undergo training will register to be on that register, which will ensure to seek employment in the oil and gas sector. The second register, Mr. Speaker, will register all of our local businesses in the various sectors, whether you're a farmer, whether you do catering, whether you're in pest control business, whether you're welding and fabrication, or any other related field that you can offer services to the oil and gas sector. you will register with the local content secretariat. So the first task of that secretariat, Mr. Speaker, is to create those two registers. One that deals specifically with human resources, employment, and the second which deals with the business registration of our business that will offer goods and services to the oil and gas sector. Mr. Speaker, the companies, the IOCs, the contractors, subcontractors will then be asked to prepare and submit what we call the Master Local Content Plan, a master plan. The master plan is a 5-year plan that will speak to the 3 areas, the sub-plans: 1, employment; 2, capacity development; and 3, procurement. So the master plan and the annual plan will be subdivided into 3 sub-plans or 3 subcategories: 1 that deals specifically with employment, 1 that deals with procurement, and 1 deals with capacity development. Mr. Speaker, upon the submission of the master plan, and then of course the master plan which is a 5-year plan, every year the companies will be required to submit an annual plan for review and approval, review by the Secretariat and approval by the Minister. Mr. Speaker, what these plans will help us to do is that they will help us as Guyanese, it will help us as a government to understand, to further understand the oil and gas sector, to understand what are the requirements in the sector in terms of human resources, what skill set is needed, for our local businesses to understand what goods and services are needed, what quality of goods and services are needed, and also to recognize areas where we need to build capacity, and for us as a government in partnership with others to develop capacity so over a period of time we can change that schedule to ensure that more and more benefits come to Guyanese. And I want to say too, Mr. Speaker, that there may be 40 areas in the schedule that targets were set for. But as I mentioned earlier, it is not cast in stone, it is a working document. There are many other areas that we can develop skill. There are many other areas, I'm sure, which we will develop skill over the next few years that will be added to that schedule. And we have even put in the bill, Mr. Speaker, and we have made it easy for the schedule or for changes to be made to that schedule by simply doing an order and, of course, a negative resolution in National Assembly. So it won't be difficult for us to make changes. We have a listening ear. We will keep engaging the private sector and the other bodies to ensure that we know what is needed and what capacity we have. Because, Mr. Speaker, in crafting the local content bill, it wasn't an easy task, as you would realize, because the oil and gas sector, and we have to be honest, the oil and gas sector is new to all of us. The oil and gas sector is new to Guyana. We may be very familiar with logging, mining, agriculture, and other sectors, but we are not as familiar as we should be in the oil and gas sector. So the local content bill now would help us to fully understand the day-to-day operation of the oil and gas sector and what skill set is needed, what goods and services are needed on a day-to-day basis, and what certification is required for our local companies so that they can start to build their capacity. But we need to start somewhere. We needed to start somewhere. It is true too, Mr. Speaker, that I don't believe we have ever done an assessment of our capacity, an assessment of what we truly have in-house or in Guyana, what capacity our local businesses have to offer goods and services, how many trained persons we have in Guyana that can work directly in the oil and gas sector, especially in the technical managerial positions. We have never really done that assessment. So we had to base our schedule, Mr. Speaker, on the number of consultations that we would have held with the private sector, with operators, with the many other groups that would have contributed over the last year or so. So the schedule there is based purely on consultations and knowledge of our local capacity, knowledge of what we have in country, but we really need, and I think the GCCI, the private sector, they have committed, or they've been trying for a while now, to do a capacity assessment. So for us to come to the National Assembly and say we should have put 100% here, or we should have included this in the schedule, may or may not be right, because we truly don't have an assessment, a true assessment of what capacity we have. But with a target set and the time frame given, because in that schedule, all the IOCs, the contractors, will have until the December 2022 to reach those targets. So it means, Mr. Speaker, in 2022, we will be in a better position, or by the ending of 2022, we will be in a better position to know exactly what we have in Guyana in terms of capacity, as within our human resource base, and also capacity among our local private sector. Because we, Mr. Speaker, need to be honest and straight up, because we need to recognize too that we have challenges of our own. We lack capacity in many areas as within the oil and gas sector. There are certain services that we cannot offer now as a country. So we need to recognize our limitations. And we need to accept it, and we need to build capacity. That is the key term, that is the key area here, Mr. Speaker. I believe this bill would highlight the areas that we need to build capacity in. And that, I believe, is one of the high points of the local content bill. Some may say that the schedule should be different, but we are basing it on consultation, basing it on our knowledge of what we have. But I want to say to the people of Guyana, and with the opposition support, that we will keep changing that schedule. We will keep changing that schedule, and we will also keep adding different services to that schedule based on our capacity. As we build capacity, we are willing as a government to make changes to the schedule, with support from the opposition. Mr. Speaker, the sub-plans, as I mentioned before, will help us to recognize what capacity we have and where we need to do training. For example, Mr. Speaker, the employment sub-plan will speak specifically to the skills and competency that we need in the oil and gas sector. It will also anticipate the shortages of skill set in the Guyanese workforce and where we need to fill the gaps. It will identify training areas, or areas that we need to do training. So, Mr. Speaker, the sub-plans that will be presented by the companies will help us as a government and as a country to ensure that we truly develop capacity that Guyanese and Guyanese businesses can benefit from the oil and gas sector. Mr. Speaker, also within this bill, we will establish what we have termed an interagency advisory committee. However, Mr. Speaker, we would have received, I think it's 14 proposed amendments from the opposition benches, from the Honorable Mr. Patterson, 14 amendments. We would have considered those 14 amendments. As a government, Mr. Speaker, we are always willing. We are always willing to listen. We are always willing to work with anybody who is willing to work with us, especially in the development of the oil and gas sector. Especially in the development of the oil and gas sector. And Mr. Speaker, I can speak specifically to the natural resources sector. And I want to say clearly that the natural resources of this country doesn't belong to me or doesn't belong to the government of Guyana. The natural resources of this country belongs to the people of Guyana. The people who we represent. The people who we represent. The people who elected us to be here today to represent them. And if there are suggestions from any group, including the opposition members, that will strengthen the local content bill and will add to bringing more benefits to Guyanese. We are open to that, Mr. Speaker. But it is unfortunate that we only received it yesterday. And even further, Mr. Speaker, this is disappointing that we showed up with our Chief Whip this morning at 9:30 a.m. to hold a meeting with members of the opposition, only to be told that only 2 persons are here and we should deal with it on the floor. We were willing to meet. Myself, the Chief Whip, the Minister of Finance, the Attorney General. We were here since 9:15 this morning waiting on the opposition members so that we could have met and discuss the 14 amendments that you're proposing for the local content bill. I believe somehow the excitement is getting to us and we are mixing up the NRF with the local. We are debating the local content bill right now. And these amendments are for the local content bill, signed by the Honorable Member, Mr. Patterson. And in the spirit of inclusiveness, Mr. Speaker, we went ahead. Regardless that the opposition did not show up, we went ahead to table 10 of the 14 amendments proposed by the opposition. 10 of the 14 amendments proposed by the opposition. That we table it. We have the amendments here that you propose that we accept, because the amendments will strengthen the bill. And what do we want as a government? We want a strong local content bill. We want a bill that will bring benefits to Guyanese. And if your contribution will do that, then we will accept it. So I'm happy to say that we would have tabled 10 of the 14 recommendations made by the opposition. Unfortunately, there were a few that we could not agree with. For example, a citizen should only be by birth. Now, we can't go against the Constitution in agreeing to that. So speaking about the Interagency Advisory Committee, Mr. Speaker, there was a recommendation that we should have a local content committee, oversight committee. So we are saying, Mr. Speaker, that we agree, but we will call it the Local Content Advisory Committee. We agree with that. And many others here. For example, on that same committee, a number of agencies were proposed to be on that committee. We said, yes, we don't have a problem with the National Tashau Council. We don't have a problem with the Guyana Bar Association. We don't have a problem with a representative from the local petroleum organization. And we don't have a problem with the parliamentary opposition representative either. So, Mr. Speaker, we are accepting that a member of the parliamentary opposition should be on this local content advisory committee. We table that. We are saying, yes, we agree to it, that one of our MPs on the opposite side will sit on the advisory committee to ensure that this bill is fully implemented so that Guyanese can benefit. Because that is the bottom line. And that should be all of us in here, that should be our objective. Regardless of which side we sit, regardless of which political party we're in, our main objective here should be to ensure that Guyanese benefit from the oil and gas sector. That is why we believe.
Honorable Minister, this morning I've been quite lax. I've heard damn, I've heard shame, now I'm hearing thief. Please, let's confine ourselves to parliamentary language. Honorable Minister, please continue.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Further, Mr. Speaker, we are accepting that the local content register, the 2 registers that I spoke of, one to deal with employment and one to deal with goods and services, that they are published that they are published on the ministry's website or in the media. We are accepting to that. We have tabled that. Mr. Speaker, also, there was an amendment or proposal that the president appoint the chairman of that committee and that the committee appoint or elect the vice chairman. We are agreeing to that. We have no problem with that, Mr. Speaker. So, Mr. Speaker, these are some, and I think it was distributed to all honorable members, these are some of the amendments that were proposed by the opposition that we as a government, we are accepting because we see these amendments as strengthening the bill, and that is what we want, to ensure that we have a strong local content bill. Further to that, Mr. Speaker, we are also tabling an additional four more amendments. One will speak to the Partnership Act. One will speak to the Partnership Act to ensure that we have Guyanese represented here. And the other one will speak to equal payments for Guyanese once the skill set correspond to any foreign or expat worker. And that is critical and that is key, Mr. Speaker. Because we cannot have a Guyanese that holds the same qualification or skill set as against an expat who has the same qualification and skill set is being underpaid or that is receiving different remuneration. And that is why we would have added to the bill to ensure that Guyanese with similar skill set are paid the same salaries or receive the same remuneration as the expat workers. And that is something that our Guyanese have been calling for. Our brothers and sisters working in the oil and gas sector has been asking us to include, and we have listened to them, and we have included that in the local content bill. Further to that, Mr. Speaker, again, based on consultation, we have changed in the schedule, or we are proposing, to change in the schedule the accounting services. We are going to rename it local, or we're proposing, to rename it local accounting services and change it from 20% to 90%. From 20% to 90%. Similarly, for local insurance, we are proposing to change it from 90% to 100%. To 100%. Because we realize, based on consultation, there is capacity. There is capacity. So, Mr. Speaker, this just shows how open and transparent we are and how willing we are to make changes to the schedule once we know that there is capacity to deliver quality goods and services. Because we have said it to the private sector, that in no way the local content legislation is being tabled, or the bill is being tabled in Parliament to give a monopoly or to create a monopoly, or to allow Guyanese businesses to supply or to provide mediocre services. And we got to be careful about that too, because we want our local businesses to be competitive. We want our local businesses to be competitive both in price and quality, so that we can compete regionally and internationally. And oil companies will not come to us and complain that because of this legislation, we are forced to buy substandard goods or we are forced to employ people who are not qualified. We want our people to be competitive. Our businesses must be competitive, regionally and internationally, and also our people must be trained and qualified and have the requisite skill set to function effectively and efficiently in the oil and gas sector. That is our intention as a government. And that is the only way we see it, Mr. Speaker, that people will truly benefit from the oil and gas sector. Mr. Speaker, of course, as one would expect, and as our Guyanese brothers and sisters would expect, in this bill, we must have penalties. We must have penalties. Because we cannot tell you that you have to achieve 90%, a 90% target on local accounting services, and at the end of the year, you're only 50%. And what do we do as a government? We just give them a tap on the back or a tongue lashing? No, Mr. Speaker. We believe that there should be penalties so that there is adherence. So that there is adherence to the local content legislation. And in the bill, we have some penalties ranging from 1 million, fines from 1 million to $50 million. To $50 million. So we are saying to the oil companies, the licensee or the contractors, that if you don't fulfill the target set out in this legislation, or if you do not attempt to do so, then we are going to fine you 50 million Guyana dollars. If we have people, and we have to be careful of this, trying to front for Guyanese businesses, or we have Guyanese being used as economic rent, then there is a penalty for that too. If people supply incorrect or inaccurate information to the local content secretariat, there must be a fine or a penalty too, because we cannot tolerate that. It means that if someone is fronting, it means that they're depriving a legitimate Guyanese business of truly enjoying the benefits in the oil and gas sector. So, Mr. Speaker, as expected, we have penalties ranging from $1 million to $50 million for different offenses in the local content bill. And my colleagues would, and I'm sure the Attorney General, who has been integrally involved in crafting this bill, will expand further on some of these areas that I would have touched on. And then I, of course, will be given the opportunity, Mr. Speaker, through you, to wrap up at the end of this debate. But, Mr. Speaker, I just wish to say that we expect that the local content bill will be supported by all members of this National Assembly, because it is a bill that will truly bring benefits to Guyanese. It is a bill that was needed, I think, 3 or 4 years ago. We should have already had local content legislation in place by now. I know in January of 2020, the opposition would have hurriedly Mr. Speaker, they would have hurriedly launched a local content policy. But we couldn't use that policy. We couldn't even use that policy to draft a bill. We couldn't even use that policy to draft a bill. And then in January of 2020, when the government is illegal, when you were illegal in January 2020, we discovered oil in 2015, you took office in 2015, we started production in December 2019, in December of 2019, so basically between 2015 to 2019, nothing was done. Nothing was done to manage the sector. No framework was put in place to ensure that we manage the sector efficiently. And we are speaking about monies and oil money. What about the 18 million bonus? What about the 18 million bonus, since we are speaking about that? That is where we should answer. Because many of you were not here in the National Assembly, but I was here. And I would have heard that it was a gift and we didn't know about it. And it is in some account somewhere to fight Venezuela and all sorts of stories we heard in this very National Assembly. Many of you were not here. But maybe you should go back to the answer and you will see that questions were asked. And these were the answers provided that we thought was a gift, that we don't know. And then a year and a half, then through, because of us and the media, there was acceptance that, there was an 18 million bonus, but we didn't know it was. We thought it was a gift. So when we talk about transparency and accountability, we got to start from there. Because nothing was done in those 4 or 5 years, to manage the oil and gas sector. Nothing was done. A petroleum commission bill was tabled sometime in 2017 that gave the minister all the power. All of us in the National Assembly, again, some of you were not there, so you don't know. And then all of us agreed that it should go to a special select committee. And where is it? It is probably still in the special select committee with dust and cobweb on it right now. Not a single meeting was held by that special select committee to discuss it. So it shows that there was no interest by the AFP and UAFC to build a proper framework or to build out the architecture to manage the oil and gas sector. The no confidence motion was passed in December 2018. Production started in December 2019. And then a lopsided policy was presented in January of 2020, 1 month before election. 1 month before election. To say what? To say, oh, we have a policy. To say what? Oh, we have a policy. What policy is that? A policy. We are moving further. We are moving further today, Mr. Speaker, to have this bill supported and passed in this National Assembly so that people can benefit from the oil and gas sector. People are crying out there for benefits. Because when you were in government, when the opposition was in government, we have heard so much. We heard so much about forest oil and how the money will be distributed and what will be done with all the oil money. But yet people are crying out there and people are still asking, how are they going to benefit from the oil and gas sector? Mr. Speaker, the answer to that is in this bill. The answer to that will be debated today in both bills, as a matter of fact. The local content bill and the natural resource fund amendments. That is the answer. That is the answer to our people who've been crying out for wanting to know how they will truly benefit from the oil and gas sector. So, Mr. Speaker, I wish to thank you, and I ask that the bill, after the debate, is passed unanimously in this National Assembly. Thank you.